Hi, my name is Abby Shukai. I am a middle school art teacher, and I am going to be showing you how to do slip casting in a way that is approachable for your beginner students. This is something that I do with my middle school students, but it is also something that allows students to explore making multiples, but only using single part molds. If you've ever done slip casting before, part of the battle is the two-part molds that you make, and it can be a lot of steps for younger kids or beginners who have done this for the very first time. So I have been utilizing a system of using one-part molds that works really well, and hopefully it will give you some ideas that you can explore it with your students. So first, let's talk about the mold making. Typically, what I will do is I will take a tub of plaster, we'll mix it in here, and then I will use a variety of silicone molds. So you can see these are the exact same ones that you see here. We mix the plaster in there, set the molds on top, weight it down so that it stays in there, and then you have these molds that just pop right out. So the same thing was done to create these floral shape molds. These silicone molds you typically find in like baking aisles and things like that, but they're really versatile for our needs here. So here, done in a exact similar way of filling the bucket there. As the plaster sets, you just peel that off. Another example of this is I have a really small mold here that was actually created by using the bottom half of this piece here. And when I take this piece out, I think you'll be able to see it a little bit. But all of these little pieces were created from the use of this mold. So when we're talking about making multiples, that's what I mean by making more than one of the same things. And that's what slip casting is generally used for. We want to reproduce the same piece every single time. And so while it can seem like it's just a way to, we're just copying the same thing every single time, it's a way to get students to explore things without the pressure of messing up because they know that they can do it again. So let's look at then how we actually use these molds as far as a single part mold. So when we looked at this, if I were to make this a little bit deeper, where if I would have made the mold where this shape comes in, that goes out, then in, I would have trouble pulling the piece out after I've done the slip casting because of the turns, but because I only did the bottom half of it, we don't have a problem. So I'm gonna kind of work in backwards order here since these pieces are ready to be released. So I'm gonna show you how to release these pieces, but how we get them to the stage that they're at now. But then I'll go through some more ideas on how what's the purpose of using these? Why would I try this with my students? So here I have this mold, and it's ready to, after we do the slip casting, which I'll show you here in a second, I know that it's ready to pour out because it's away from the edges. So if I were to just turn it over like this, it should just wiggle and pop right out. And so this can be a really exciting process for students. So we see the inside of the mold here, but they basically have a perfect little piece that comes out. Now, from inside of here, maybe especially around the edges, you might need to use a ribbon tool or something to kind of smooth it out a little bit because there are gonna be some imperfections of it. But let's say your students maybe it wasn't dry enough and they put it in, or they tried to take it out too soon. It's no big deal. They can just do it again. So how do we get to this process? So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to use, this is a little bit different color of slip, but it will work the same way. So I'm just going to start by pouring this slip in. And generally speaking, you want to use this, you want this slip to sit for a couple of minutes or so. And you'll see that it'll start forming on the edges, just giving it some time to sit up. So we're gonna come back to this one in just a couple of minutes, and I'll show you what we do next. So let's take a look at this style of mold. So this style of mold is so easy to use, and you can create so many different shapes of them at the same time, which is one of the nice things about multiples. But these will be ready to come out. You should just be able to peel them out. Sometimes you just have to turn it over and they'll pop out. If you're having a hard time getting them out, you can also take a piece of leather hard clay and just like stamp it to it. But one of the cool things about these is that you can put them together to create almost a perfect sphere. So I like to use this style with my students to create some creativity challenges, which I'll get to in a second because I want to show you how this works first. So let's fill these up. So this is how they will get released. So I'm actually going to be using, this is going to, has a little tint of purple to it. It's a purple colored slip that has been colored with a mason stain. So all I'm doing is I'm just going to fill this up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of wiggle it into place to make sure it's nice and smooth. Now, if I were just to leave it like this, these clay pieces are going to be a little bit thicker. So what happens is if I just set this overnight, maybe even a couple of days, it all depends on your humidity and the moisture that's in your space. What's happening to this slip is it's kind of seeping into the sides of the plaster. That moisture is taking some of that out. And eventually you're going to get kind of this half sphere concave shape. So to get this though, sometimes it might dry a little bit thicker like these ones did. So you might choose to pour these out like I'm gonna do with this piece here in a second. This same type of thing can be done with more intricate designs. You just have to be careful that they're not going too deep. So sometimes I have students who will use the same type of process to pull out these little pieces. This one's not quite ready to take out yet, but in here, then students can create these to add on to pieces that they're creating. Maybe they want it to be a piece that they slip and score onto it to create a little bit of a visual element to it. Maybe they struggle with hand building techniques. So this slip casting technique in this way can work kind of as a differentiation tool for those students who might not have confidence in their skill building techniques. Okay, so we're gonna push this over to the side. And I'm gonna take this, and this is settled a little bit. I can see it kind of forming around the edges a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tip this over and you just dump it out. That's all you do. And typically you would want this to sit here for maybe 2 to 3 minutes to make sure everything runs out so you don't get any drips or anything like that. But then as you turn it over, you can already see that, so you can see on the top there where I'd want to make that drip down a little bit longer, but you can already see the shape of that starting to form. So once again, depending on the humidity level, the temperature in your classroom, this might be ready to go the next day. It might even be ready a few hours later. So that is a really great way to make multiples with that. And then your students can explore different techniques by having a container of the same exact thing. So on this one, the sgraffito technique was explored. On this one, it's a little bit shorter, so maybe the student had to do a little carving down. This student actually explored using different colors of slip, where they poured in a yellow slip first, which is why it's on the outside, and then they used a blue colored slip on the inside. So then on all of these, we could try different techniques, and like we talked about earlier, it's so low stakes that if students mess something up, it's not a big deal. They will try new things because they know they can just go back and make another one. All right, so let's get back to our clay little half spheres here. So as we let these sit a little bit, we can do that same thing of pouring it over into a container to help that out. Now, if you want them to be thicker, you don't need to do this part, but if you do want them to be a little bit thinner, like these pieces here, you will tip them over, and my container isn't big enough here. So I just tip that over, and I didn't do this as much as the last one. And then what I would do is just take my loop tool and kind of clean up these edges here, get rid of that slip. That stuff doesn't really matter because it's gonna settle down. And then how we started at the beginning of this video with these little pieces popping out, probably in the next day or so, that's exactly how those are gonna look. So I briefly discussed, okay, what's the purpose of that? Well, there's a variety of ways that you could use these with your students. So my favorite way to use them with my students is to do it as a clay creativity challenge. So what I will have my students do is they will take their two sides of their spheres and we learn how to slip it. We review how to slip and score them together so that we create a full sphere shape. So we put them together. And then, so that could be one way that we do that. And then maybe they would add texture onto it. So then we do this to create a texture tool that we bisque fire. It can be used on different pieces of clay to actually create texture. So that's one way you can do it, by creating textured rollers. Now, the other way that I like to think about it with the creativity challenge is basically if we were to put these two forms together, they're all gonna be the same. What makes your hollow sphere different than somebody else's? Well, that's the challenge. So you might have a student who doesn't want to fully put theirs together because they want to slip it, score it like this and make a little Pac-Man, or maybe they want to add in some elements to it, or maybe they want to make it into a like a clam with a little pearl inside. Those are the creative things that you can do with your students. And because they can just reproduce them and do them multiple times, your students will be excited to do that. So here's an example of, and some students will will fire these pieces and they'll use them to create mini objects. So here's another example of one of those creativity challenges where the students put it together and they added some texture onto it to make it look like a little macaroon. So it's a way for students to not only explore slip casting, but they can make multiples in a way that allows them to, turn something that looks the same to everybody else's and find a way to make it their own. So those are just a couple of ways that you can try single mold slip casting. It's a pretty easy process to do with your students, and they will, especially for those students that maybe aren't so confident in their clay making skills, this will be the perfect one to try out with your students. So I hope that you are able to try this with your students sometime.